Let's talk about the killing of the UnitedHealthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. He was shot in broad daylight in the middle of Manhattan last week. Now, a suspect has been identified, Luigi Mangione. Tom, the online reaction to this, I think it's fair to say, has been insane on a number of levels. I think, first of all, we had the sort of wave of sympathy with the killing on the grounds that essentially the US healthcare system is decrepit, insurance companies are corrupt, all those kinds of things, which you might sympathise with those ideas, but not to the point of killing someone. And now that the suspect, his identity has emerged, we're seeing an almost fanboying of him.
No, absolutely. It kind of started with, it's been a strange mix of things, hasn't it? On the one hand, a kind of gallows humour, a kind of tongue-in-cheek celebration of this alleged killer as almost a sort of Robin Hood figure, and also seemingly people who are just quite attracted to him. It seems to be a mix of all of these things put together.
Like his six-pack or whatever.
Yeah, it's an odd one, but I think the thing that kind of connects it is just a profound sort of like moral confusion, really, about what has taken place here. I mean, the suspect Luigi Mangione, to the extent that we know much about him, it's that he wasn't any kind of hardcore leftist taking up arms by any stretch of the imagination. Seems to be someone who, broadly speaking, was quite into the kind of centrist podcast bro circuit, you know, quite a bit socially conservative, quite into AI chat and gym tips, that kind of thing. Yeah. But seems to have become preoccupied with the healthcare issue, had back problems himself. The very short manifesto that they found on him when he was accosted at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania referred to the CEO seemingly as parasite, saying that something needed to be done. Wrote words on the shell casings of the bullets, which are words that routinely appear in kind of health insurance policy documents and so on. So he's been, I don't think it's unfair to say, kind of celebrated, and not just by, you know, people with eggs as their avatars on Twitter, but, you know, from quite prominent, not necessarily like the organised American left, but, you know, the kind of streamers, the YouTubers, that whole kind of bubble that exists that talks endlessly about these topics and have alarmingly large audiences. I suppose the response from American conservatives has been to present this as a sort of mainstreaming or an apologising for a kind of revolutionary politics, a kind of rise in and support for political violence. I think it's something a bit stranger than that in some respects. I think there's a kind of celebration of this it's kind of an expression of a weird sort of cynicism almost. It's like, you know, this might not achieve anything and it's quite gross, but at least it's landed some abstract blow against the man or whatever, even though what we're talking about here is a cold-blooded murder. But it's become a kind of real pop cultural moment. Yeah. As much as anything else. And that's something that I don't think many people saw coming when they first heard news about this particular killing. Yeah,
Claire, it does have that feel of, you know, the left not able, or unfortunately hasn't succeeded in transforming the US healthcare system, can't really change society anymore, doesn't have that kind of power and influence. So reduced to taking a sort of vicarious thrill in certain quite tragic events, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tom's right to say that it's not particularly the mainstream left. It's more of a vibe around this, which is, it's understandable because there is a hostility to corporate America. I mean, they're the bad guys, and, you know, health insurance is certainly one of the bad guys, which objectively we can all say, if you get sick in America and you aren't well off, is a horrible situation to be in. So I that can be, sorry about the pun here, but weaponized in such a way that it becomes, just as you say, the cultural vibe, which is, well, it's sort of understandable, which is disconcerting and unnerving. For me, there's something about, it is a strange case because this young man is obviously very disturbed. I think his back pain was slightly more than just back pain. I mean, I think he's been in agony. And what's more, his mother had a very debilitating pain problem. And I think and he was worried that he was going in the same direction. I mean, the kind of, you know, a young woman, but has destroyed the quality of her life. And I'm sure there's all that. I sound like I'm doing a personal story, but you can see it's obviously messed him up in a big way. Yeah. But one of the things that's peculiar when you read the manifesto, because it's very slight, is you just have a sense of grievance culture, which is mainstream. It's not that he's left, but a sort of grievance culture. and also there's nothing else that I can do but this. You know, that nobody will listen to us. Nothing can be done. And I think that kind of nihilistic sense of despair is actually a bit more prevalent than one would think. It's not that people are going to go around killing people, but I do think that's weird, you know, weirdly of the moment. And as I say, grievance culture does lead people into these quite dark, violent fantasies, you know, which is that, you know, your enemy becomes somebody that needs to be taken out. And so I fear for that kind of vibe. I did want to, however, also back up, Tom, or what you said about what the right's response to this, which I think has been less than helpful, to say the least, because if you go around trying to suggest that this very disturbed alleged murderer is, you know, oh, it's just like Antifa, you know what I mean? He's like a commie, Antifa, militant lefty. You think, oh, that's as numpties, you know what I mean? Hopeless. Because that doesn't express what's happening and actually misses the moment. It's perfectly right to hold Antifa types accountable for the kind of violent interactions they've had on the streets, the way they want to compel speech on people. And, you know, we all remember the Black Lives Matters moment and all of the rest of it. Their version of cancel culture is pretty vicious and physical, but that's not what this young man represents. And you don't want to be so crude as to just go, anyone who's not right wing is part of some communist violent backlash. It doesn't help anyone understand the world.
And it almost kind of treats it as almost too political in a sense, because there always are, you know, in a country that big with that many weapons, there are always probably going to be people whose personal or political grievances will turn violent at some kind of point. The difference is you don't want as a political culture to in any way justify or to give weight to that, and that seems to be what's sort of taking place. And I think because it feels of a piece with trends and discussions, particularly on the American left, that have been taking place over recent years, which even though these are different phenomena, the way in which, say, the Black Lives Matter riots were, despite also being a kind of form of mindless violence effectively, were justified, to some extent celebrated, presented as an understandable response to an unjust system. You feel that these things are kind of a piece, that because there is this climate in which people feel like the society, it's not just the society is on the wrong track, it needs to be changed, maybe even changed quite radically. It's that it's rotten, unchangeable, and so you might as well go out in a blaze of glory. That is something which is beginning to be more clearly articulated in those kinds of corners.
And you can imagine it. I mean, people don't do this as yet, but you can imagine a situation where this guy is a bit like a sort of school shooter. But, you know, you're not in a situation where school shootings happen, these terrible events, and people go, well, it's understandable. There is discipline in the school and those teachers are quite authoritarian. You know what I mean? I mean, but it's almost of a piece with that, what the way that people are accepting that what he did was understandable. I also think that we have to give some credit to the fact, we have to understand, I think, that nihilism is very dangerous. You know, that kind of despair. He himself says, you know, I do what I have to do. I'm very sorry in advance to anyone who might be upset. I thought you're not putting out an offensive post, right? You're going out with a gun to kill people. But he says, I have to. This is what we need to do. And that's the bit of desperation, which is apolitical, anti-political, that I do think, that's what I'm saying, is a vibe that I think is a bit more recognisable and worrying. And I do think as well that crass anti-corporate politics is, which we see all the time, you know, anti-big pharma, anti-big bank, anti-big, I mean, you know, you can do a sophisticated critique of corporate America without just everything that is bad being the responsibility of big corporate.
Yeah, definitely.